Shana Tova. I am fascinated with how we navigate our way through the world and how different we humans are from the rest of the animal kingdom. As they seek direction, dung beetles follow the Milky Way. The cataglyphous desert ant dead reckons by counting its paces. Monarch butterflies on their 1,000-mile multi-generational flight from Mexico to the Rocky Mountains use an inherited mental map to calculate due north using the position of the sun. This requires them to account for the time of the day of the year, and their latitude. Honeybees, newts, spiny lobsters, sea turtles, and many other creatures can intuitively read magnetic fields. Clearly, they and other long-distance migrants inherit a sense that they have to be on the move, and they inherit a mental map of how to get there and the ability to constantly recalibrate it. What it looks like in their mind's eye, however, and how it is maintained day and night across thousands of miles is still a mystery to scientists. Animals seem to have both an innate need for motion in a direction and these innate abilities to sense the precise path they need to tread, the air and water currents they need to follow. How does it work for us, we humans? Kim Tingley, a fellow at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism, writes that, quote, though mankind has managed to navigate itself across the globe and into outer space, it has done so in defiance of, in spite of, our poor innate wayfinding capacities, which are still those of forest-dwelling homebodies. Other species use far more sophisticated cognitive methods to orient themselves. It sure would be easier, wouldn't it, if we were born with a mental map from the beginning of our lives to the end? If only we were born with an innate sense of exactly where we were headed, exactly what it all meant, exactly what we were meant to do in this life. Like other animals, we are born with a need for direction. But unlike them, it seems that we don't have those same inborn abilities, so we need other ways to figure out why we are here, what our purpose is, and how we get from here to there. Let's start with that first question. All of us here on the Bima are so happy to see you this morning. Welcome home. It seems fairly miraculous to me that we come out in such force on these days. But really, why are you here? Of all the places you could have been today. The story is told of a visitor to a synagogue in Pinsk, or was it Minsk, on Rosh HaShanah, who sat between Yussel and Rachel. The visitor sat in the service for a while, taking in the music, the rhythm, the words, the movement, the sights and sounds. And after a bit, the visitor leaned over to Rachel and asked, "Why are you here in the synagogue?" Rachel thought for a moment and said, "I'm here to talk to God." The visitor took this in and considered the profundity of Rachel's words. After a few moments, the visitor leaned over to Yussel and asked the same question, "Why are you here in the synagogue?" Yussel thought for a moment and said, "I'm here to talk to Rachel." The synagogue as a central institution in Jewish life has been around for almost 2,000 years, and people have always flocked to it for a variety of reasons. The reason that the synagogue has not only survived but thrived for 2 millennia, though, through the many trials and tribulations of our people, is because synagogue leaders and members have always been willing to ask hard questions that challenge assumptions. Today, as in generations past, we must ask ourselves more than, is the synagogue still a relevant institution for us? We must ask, can it still serve as a North Star for the Jewish people in the decades to come? We will fill this sanctuary twice today, but we must ask, can this sacred place provide a compelling vision that will engage the next generation of Jews whose assumptions about affiliation are very different than our own? In short, can the synagogue nourish us and our children and our grandchildren in the 21st century as we strive to figure out how to navigate in this massive, beautiful, confusing, complicated world of ours? It is self-evident to say that the world has changed so very much since the days of the first synagogues. But consider the words of the earliest synagogue inscription uncovered to date, written in Greek, dating from the 1st century BCE. It was discovered just south of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and it says, quote, Theodotos, son of Vetinos, the priest and synagogue leader, built the synagogue for the reading of the Torah and studying of the commandments, and as a hostel with chambers and water installations to provide for the needs of itinerants from abroad. For 2,000 years, it seems, we have found our spiritual guidance in an institution that has helped us learn how to find meaning in our lives, has taught us how to use a kind of compass called Torah, that has offered us opportunities to find deep human connection in a world that can be deeply disconnected, and that has invited each of us to act powerfully and with purpose in a way that no other institution in our lives can. Shari Tefillah has thrived for many, many good reasons for 170 years so far. If it is to thrive for the next 170, I share with you today my perspective on the 3 visionary directions our synagogue must focus on and be excellent at. Excellent, that is, if it is to serve those of us who are here and serve the next generation of Jews who, we must do more than hope and pray, will fill this sanctuary and others like it for decades to come. Let's examine these guiding principles and the foundations on which they rest, one at a time. First and foremost, I believe that we humans still need a sense of meaning in our lives. As Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, quote, ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. Life in the concentration camp taught Frankl that our main drive or motivation in life is not pleasure, as Freud thought, but meaning. We can find meaning in many places in life, for sure, but our Jewish sacred tradition, Torah, its commentaries, the Mishnah, the Talmud, Jewish literature and poetry and music and mystical traditions and prayer and responsa are profound depths to plumb for understanding what our lives are meant to be about. I'm here in part, perhaps some of you are here too, because the synagogue can be a unique source of meaning making. We can find answers to life's biggest questions. Why are we here on earth? Is humanity the measure of all things, or is there some larger force in the universe? How do we navigate the complexities of the ethical and moral choices we are called upon to make each and every day? What happens when we die? Why do bad things happen to good people? As a synagogue, when we commit to raising Jewish people, not just B'nai Mitzvah, when we offer dynamic, multi-generational worship that inspires us, uplifts us, brings us closer to God, and fills the sanctuary more than twice a year, when we dedicate our resources to creating not just programs, but transformational experiences for all the households of this congregation, and when we invest in lifelong learning with the greatest teachers of modern Jewish and secular life, we have found over the many decades that this synagogue has been uniquely positioned amongst the institutions in our lives to provide a deep dive into the sea of Jewish meaning. Today, we must double down on those commitments. Together, we can provide opportunities for serious and compelling study for our children, yes, and for all of us. Together, across the generations, we can experience the old, new mystery and wisdom and wonder of our most sacred teachings. Like Rachel, many of us gather in this space to seek out a sense of meaning that transcends us. Human beings have an innate need for inspiration, for safe space to share their questions about life's deepest questions, and for honest and profound answers to those questions. My friends, people crave this sense of meaning, and they will find it somewhere, like the needle on the compass seeks due north. For Shari Tefillah to remain a primary institution for Jews and fellow travelers here on the Upper East Side, this must be a sacred space of deep learning, of deep reflection, of deep meaning. Which brings me to the second reason that brings some of us here. Like Yussel, some of us are here because we want to talk to each other. The word synagogue itself gives away one of the primary reasons for its existence. It comes from a Greek word meaning assembly, a place of meeting. The synagogue existed even while the temple in Jerusalem still stood. It was a place where people met to do local business and to promote the general welfare of the Jewish community. The synagogue was first and foremost the Jewish community center of the ancient world. Different cultures have different beliefs about how important social connections and interdependence are to our lives. In the West, we like to think of ourselves as relatively immune to the sway of those around us while we each pursue our personal destiny. But my experience indicates that this is a story we like to tell ourselves rather than what really happens. But don't take my word for it. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman, author of Social: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect, writes, across many studies of mammals, from the smallest rodents all the way to us humans, the data suggests that we are profoundly shaped by our social environment and that we suffer greatly when our social bonds are threatened or severed. We may not like the fact that we are wired such that our well-being depends on our connections with others, but the facts, Lieberman says, are the facts. Some might ask, why keep the doors of the synagogue open when we can just have a virtual community? Why not replace expensive brick and mortar with a Snapchat synagogue? I think this is a fair and important and uncomfortable question. And if Shari Tefillah is to thrive in the 21st century, we will need to wrestle with this question. Now, I'm a big fan of social media. I connect with old friends on Facebook. I tweet at Rav Moss, not at 3 in the morning. Most of the couples who invite me to conduct their weddings these days have met online at sites like JDates. And many people watch our Shabbat and holiday services via live stream. If you're watching via live stream, we wish you a virtual Shana Tova. And yet, I am convinced that nothing replaces the power of face-to-face connection, and that we crave that connection in the most sacred and mundane moments of our lives. We can and should use technology as a synagogue when we can't reach out and touch someone. But should we have a baby naming exclusively via Skype? A bat mitzvah where you stay home and the cantors and rabbis and congregations show up via Zoom webinar? Could we do a funeral via FaceTime? I suppose we could, and I believe it would not be the same, not nearly. Just as human beings have a basic need for food and shelter, we also have a need to belong to a group and form connections with others. We are innately driven to seek loving relationships, to fit in at school and at work, to join fraternities and sororities and clubs and teams and PTOs and, God help us, condo associations and gyms and more. To stand together and doff our caps at the ball game with patriotism towards our country, and in our case, to be deeply rooted to the land and people of Israel. We seek water cooler conversations about the latest episode of our favorite television shows and movies and the latest news. We choose to live in one of the greatest and largest cities in the world, and yet we want to root ourselves in a 5-block neighborhood, to know the doorman on our walk to work or school, to have the barista know our coffee order, and to have the dry cleaner know how we like our shirts. We're driven to gather, not to be alone, in moments of joy and heartbreak. These impulses are motivated by an incredibly impressive array of our thoughts, actions, and feelings, all related to what it means to be in deep relationship with other human beings, and all, I believe, out of a primal urge to know others and to truly be known by them. Whether you find compelling the 20th century religious philosophy of Martin Buber, who believed, as I do, that we see God when we truly see the face of another human being, or you put your trust in the 21st century science of Matthew Lieberman, it seems both a scientific and religious truth that there is nothing that compares to the presence of another human being in the presence of something larger than ourselves. The synagogue began perhaps as much as 2,300 years ago as a Beit Knesset, a house of meeting. In this incredible era of social media virtual meeting, human beings will still seek to gather, to connect, to see and be seen in the deepest sense. People will meet this need somewhere. We must decide in our generation, do we want the synagogue to be a primary place for meeting? We could start practicing right here, right now. We could each seek to connect with 5 people we don't know before we leave this space. We could be a unique community that shows up for each other in moments of joy and sorrow, even for people we don't yet know. We could be a community that cares deeply about one another. We could prioritize people before program. For Shari Tefillah to thrive into the 22nd century, to be a part of the warp and woof of the fabric of our human need to be social, we must provide serious opportunities in beautiful, flexible, well-air-conditioned, purpose-built space for people to connect to each other in deep ways. Because we can do that like no other institution in our lives. My friends, I've learned in my professional life that there is nothing inherently Hamish about a small synagogue, and nothing inherently corporate about a shul as large as ours. But that value, Hamishness, doesn't happen automatically for 1,100 families, and it doesn't happen just by hiring the right staff. It takes intentionality on all our parts, consistent communal commitment, and investment from each and every one of us. And what is it all for? What is the ultimate purpose of all of this meaning we find, all these connections we make? When we plumb the depths of Jewish text and find significant answers, when we are uplifted by powerful music and worship and communal ritual, and when we see holiness in the face of another, is that the end-all and be-all? Martin Buber would say no, and I would agree. Buber argues, quote, "The encounter with God does not come to man in order that he may henceforth attend to God, but in order that he may prove its meaning in action in the world." The synagogue has, from its inception, been a countercultural institution. It was born at a time when animal sacrifice was normative Jewish practice and audaciously asserted that such practice no longer fit with the times. It formed the Judaism we know in times of exile and challenge, and it proudly stood outside political power structures even after emancipation in Europe. We are inheritors of a prophetic tradition that has always held one radical idea above all, that the world as it is doesn't have to be this way. For thousands of years, Jews and Jewish institutions have spoken out against injustice, immorality, and iniquity within their communities, and also acted powerfully to demand accountability from those in positions of power inside and outside the Jewish community when necessary. We might trace this tradition to Abraham, who demanded that God do justice in Sodom and Gomorrah, or Moses, who demanded that the most powerful human ruler of his time let my people go. The inheritors of the prophetic voice were biblical prophets like Isaiah and Amos and Micah and Jeremiah, whose prophecies were not really about foretelling the future, so much as speaking truth derived from divine inspiration and moral conviction to bring justice, equity, and peace into their worlds, even if that truth was socially detested. But prophetic purpose has not been limited to individuals. Here in America in the 19th century, many synagogues stood publicly in opposition to slavery. In the 20th century, synagogue leaders boldly and politically pressed for women's suffrage and workers' rights and American support for the establishment of the State of Israel and for civil rights for African Americans and freedom for Jews in the former Soviet Union. And we rallied for a woman's right to choose. And in the 21st century, synagogues have pressed for American intervention in Darfur and equality for the LGBTQ+ community, even as we've rightfully advocated for Jewish causes and Jewish freedom here and everywhere. Such efforts are not mutually exclusive. My friends, there is brokenness in the world. We all see it. We find literal sanctuary from it in this space today, and yet we can't live within these walls. We need to live in the world. Having found meaning and connection here, we are commanded to pick up and mend broken pieces of God's creation wherever we find them. And while we can do that as individuals, we are exponentially more powerful when we do it together. As an individual family, we might make 10 sandwiches for hungry folks in our neighborhood. But as a congregation, we made 900 sandwiches at the last Sandwich Saturday here at Shari Tefillah. We might individually volunteer at a soup kitchen, but here in your sacred community, right there in the Davis room, we host dozens of our hungry neighbors every week and provide them a warm meal at the Hamish welcome that Shari Tefillah is proud of. We always need more volunteers. And our power to change the world from a place of meaning and connection is multiplied further still when we act together across lines of faith and race and class, together with other communities. As individuals, we might volunteer for Habitat for Humanity and build or rehab a home. As a congregation, we can join with organizations like the Metro Industrial Areas Foundation that has built 4,000 units of affordable housing in East Brooklyn, organized for access to good jobs and safe neighborhoods and excellent schools, and changed the national conversation on gun violence. Viktor Frankl taught that those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. What if you were a part of an institution that helped you understand that your life had purpose, that what you do matters, that your connection to other people can help you to act on things that you care about deeply but could never do alone? What if that institution helped you see that your sacred story of wholeness and brokenness, when combined with other stories like yours, can bring light into a city, a nation, into our world? That's a reason for the synagogue to continue to exist, if ever there was one. If we are to thrive as a synagogue in the coming decades, we must be engaged in the purpose-driven work of world repair. My friends, perhaps brain scientists will someday discover an inborn human skill akin to those of other animals, an ability to navigate the world alone, with no roadmap, no guidance, no GPS, no community. Until then, we have the synagogue, this synagogue. And I, for one, feel very blessed. But in order to meet the innate needs of our generation and generations yet to come, we, as an institution, will need to both honor the best of Shari Tefila's illustrious tradition and boldly innovate as well. Here, we can experiment with religious beliefs and forms and learning that give our lives meaning. Here, we can push the boundaries of what it means to be a sacred, large community that cares deeply for its members at every moment of our lives. Here, we can create rituals and actions that critique injustices and heal society and ourselves. Here, we can find meaning together. Here, we can be connected one to another. Here, on this block, we can build a synagogue for the next 170 years. And from here, we can truly act as God's partners in repairing the world. On this Rosh HaShanah, in this new year, let us build on what has brought us here, and let us begin again. Shana Tova.